Case 1. Yvonne Sepulveda. The year was 1992, and the setting was Mansfield, Louisiana, a modest town in DeSoto Parish known for its close-knit neighborhoods and the kind of everyday rhythms where neighbors looked out for one another, or at least believed they did. On March the 8th of that year, a 6-year-old boy named Wesley Allen Mercer, born on October the 6th, 1985, was pronounced dead at DeSoto General Hospital shortly after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The official cause, as determined by forensic pathologist Dr. George McCormick during the autopsy performed the following day, was heart and lung failure brought on by extensive third-degree burns covering 58% of the child's body combined with additional head injuries. What led to that hospital visit and the subsequent investigation forms the core of this case, drawn entirely from court documents, police records, and later public statements. Yvonne Sepulveda, then going by Yvonne Mercer, had begun a relationship with Christopher Sepulveda in September of 1990 after separating from her first husband. By January of 1991, despite concerns voiced by family members, Yvonne and young Wesley relocated to Mansfield to live with Christopher. The household dynamic deteriorated over time as Christopher's heavy drinking became a factor and initial conflicts arose. Yvonne left the residence on May 10, 1991 and returned to her parents, but periods of reconciliation followed until the family unit reformed. On March 5, 1992, just 3 days before the fatal events, Yvonne and Christopher were married. In the days immediately preceding March 8th, accounts from the investigation describe escalating incidents involving the child, including soiling accidents that prompted disciplinary responses from Christopher, such as threats and physical corrections, along with instances where Yvonne herself administered some forms of discipline and the boy was made to sleep in an unconventional spot. On the morning of March 8th, Christopher subjected Wesley to repeated beatings with a screwdriver handle that rendered the boy unconscious, after which the child was placed in a bathtub filled with water hot enough to cause the severe, scalding injuries later documented. Several hours elapsed before medical help was sought, and by the time Wesley arrived at the hospital his condition was irreversible. Law enforcement from the DeSoto Parish Sheriff's Office conducted a thorough investigation, interviewing both adults and examining the residence. Christopher Sepulveda was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, while Yvonne faced an initial charge of second-degree murder. Christopher later acknowledged striking the child, but maintained that the immersion in the tub occurred accidentally when the boy fell. The cases proceeded through the judicial system separately. Christopher's trial unfolded in DeSoto Parish in 1993. On April 17th, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the first-degree murder charge, and 2 days later, on April 19th, they recommended the death penalty. Sentencing occurred on May 24, 1993, when Judge Robert E. Burgess imposed the capital sentence on the then 49-year-old defendant. Appeals followed over the subsequent decades, with the Louisiana Supreme Court affirming the conviction in 1996, the United States Supreme Court declining review later that same year, and multiple subsequent challenges on grounds, including ineffective assistance of counsel being denied, through 2013. Christopher remained on death row at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola for more than 30 years. In early 2025, following the adoption of new execution protocols involving nitrogen gas, a warrant was issued for March 17th, but on February 22, 2025, at the age of 81 and as the oldest inmate on the state's death row, he died of natural causes while still incarcerated. Yvonne's legal proceedings took a different path. Her first trial ended in a mistrial, after which the charge was adjusted, and she ultimately stood trial on a manslaughter count. She was convicted and sentenced to 21 years at hard labor. Yvonne served 7.5 years before her release around 2002. In February of 2013, more than 20 years after the events, Yvonne, by then remarried and known as Yvonne Jones, living quietly outside Monroe and assisting at a local beauty salon, sat down for an exclusive interview with KSLA News. She described the profound difficulty she still faced when speaking about the day her son was placed in the scalding water, noting that the pain remained vivid. Yvonne stressed that her son had been her entire world and that she could scarcely process the news when doctors informed her he was gone. She recounted being arrested on the very day of Wesley's funeral while still in a state of shock, standing alongside Christopher, as both faced first-degree murder charges initially. When asked about her role, Yvonne pointed to statements from detectives who told her the issue centered not on actions she took, but on those she failed to take in protecting her child. She portrayed herself as having been trapped in a cycle of domestic abuse, feeling like a prisoner in her own home and fearing the man she had fallen in love with. To process these experiences and potentially help others, Yvonne authored a book titled The Time to Heal the Struggles of a Battered Woman, in which she detailed the patterns of control and violence she endured. In the interview, she acknowledged feeling partial responsibility for remaining in the relationship as long as she did, yet she firmly rejected any characterization of herself as inherently evil or directly responsible for taking her son's life. Instead, Yvonne spoke of personal redemption through faith, describing herself as a walking miracle who had been lifted from brokenness, mental anguish, and destitution. She hoped the book would serve as guidance for others facing similar situations to make different choices and seek safety sooner. The Mansfield community absorbed the news of Wesley's death with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief, as local reports from the time captured residents reflecting on how such events could occur in a place where people thought they knew their neighbors. The case prompted broader conversations within DeSoto Parish about recognizing signs of household distress, though the legal outcomes rested solely on the evidence presented in court. Yvonne rebuilt a quieter life after her release, while the records of the investigation, trials, and sentences remain preserved in Louisiana court archives as a factual account of what transpired in that household more than 3 decades ago. This concludes the detailed examination of the first case based entirely on public records and verified reporting. Case 2. Laura Mosley. Shifting forward to the closing months of 1999, we turn our attention to Minden and Webster Parish, another Louisiana community where daily life revolved around family routines and local connections until events in mid-December shattered that sense of normalcy. The central figure in this account is Laura Mosley, whose 6-year-old daughter Heather White became the victim of sustained mistreatment that ended in tragedy. Heather, who was only days away from turning 7, lived in the home shared by her mother and her mother's live-in boyfriend, Donald Wright, also known as Donnie Wright. On December the 12th, 1999, in the late afternoon hours around 4 or 5 o'clock, the situation at the residence reached a critical point. Heather was transported to the hospital suffering from extensive injuries consistent with repeated physical abuse, including impacts from objects such as a leather rifle strap and a wooden board that left traces of blood in multiple rooms of the home. Medical personnel observed severe trauma, notably to the head, and placed the child on life support in an attempt to stabilize her condition. Despite those efforts, Heather passed away 3 days later on December the 15th, 1999. The Webster Parish Sheriff's Office and collaborating authorities launched an immediate and intensive investigation, examining the home, interviewing witnesses, and reviewing medical evidence. The findings indicated that Wright had carried out the majority of the physical actions against Heather, with Mosley present during many of those incidents, yet not taking steps to stop the abuse or seek external assistance for her daughter. Both adults were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The case generated substantial local attention, leading to Wright's trial being relocated to Lafayette Parish to ensure an impartial jury. In August of 2000, after a lengthy and widely covered proceeding, Donald Wright was convicted of first-degree murder. The jury recommended the death penalty, and he was formally sentenced to lethal injection. As of February 2026, Wright remains on death row at Angola with no execution date carried out. Laura Mosley, whose presence during the abuse and failure to intervene or report the ongoing situation to authorities formed a key element of the case against her, faced the same first-degree murder charge. Several months after Wright's conviction, in the fall of 2000, Mosley entered a plea and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She continues to serve that sentence at a Louisiana correctional facility. Investigators at the time, including then Chief Criminal Deputy Gary Sexton, described the extent of Heather's injuries and the circumstances surrounding them as among the most disturbing they had encountered in their careers. Court records detail how the abuse had intensified over a period as the child struggled to meet expectations imposed in the household, with both adults participating in or allowing disciplinary measures that escalated beyond any reasonable boundary. The trial evidence included medical testimony about the fatal head trauma, documentation of the blood evidence throughout the home, and statements outlining the timeline from the afternoon of December the 12th through the child's final days on life support. Community members in Minden expressed shock and grief in local coverage, with many questioning how signs of distress in the household could have gone unaddressed for so long. The case underscored challenges in child welfare response within the parish, though again we confine ourselves strictly to the documented facts of the legal proceedings and outcomes. Donald Wright's conviction stood through appeals, and he has remained incarcerated on death row for more than 25 years as Louisiana continues to navigate its capital punishment protocols. Laura Mosley's sentence of life without parole has likewise been upheld, with a later petition for clemency or sentence reduction denied by the Louisiana Board of Pardons and Parole. The records from the Webster Parish investigation, the Lafayette Parish trial, and the sentencing hearings provide the complete factual foundation for understanding what occurred in that Minden home in December of 1999. Heather White's short life ended under circumstances that no child should face, and the judicial system rendered its verdicts based on the evidence presented. Case 3. Tiffany Woods. In the summer of 2005, the city of New Orleans stood on the edge of catastrophe as Hurricane Katrina approached the Gulf Coast, and among the thousands preparing to evacuate was a 25-year-old mother named Tiffany Woods who had recently given birth to her fourth child under challenging medical circumstances. Emmanuel, often referred to in records as Little Emmanuel, entered the world on June 23, 2005 at Tulane Medical Center via cesarean section, weighing just over 3 pounds and arriving so prematurely that he required immediate resuscitation, a breathing tube, and 41 days in the neonatal intensive care unit, where he received specialized formula on a demanding round-the-clock schedule due to dehydration and other complications noted at birth. Hospital records indicate he was screened for a metabolic condition known as medium-chain acyl coenzyme, a dehydrogenase deficiency, though the full implications and need for frequent feedings were not explicitly detailed in the discharge paperwork provided to the family upon his release around August 13, 2005, when he weighed approximately 5 pounds. A follow-up genetics appointment had been scheduled for August 29th, but would never take place as the storm made landfall and altered countless lives in irreversible ways. Tiffany Woods, who had grown up in New Orleans East and already raised 3 other children from previous relationships, faced the impending hurricane alongside her partner Emmanuel Scott, then 18 years old, and their blended family of 4 young children, including the infant. On the night of August 28, 2005, as evacuation orders intensified, the family loaded into a vehicle and drove 320 miles northwest to Shreveport in Caddo Parish, seeking safety in a region far removed from the flooding that would soon devastate their home city. Upon arrival, they first sought shelter at the Hirsch Coliseum Sports Arena, which had been converted into a temporary evacuation center, later transitioning to a motel and eventually securing a rented house in the area. As displaced residents from New Orleans, they encountered the practical hardships common to many evacuees, including limited resources and reliance on government assistance programs such as women, infants, and children vouchers that provided infant formula during the initial weeks. Those vouchers eventually expired in late October 2005, leaving the family to improvise as they attempted to stabilize in their new temporary environment. According to statements later given to Shreveport police and introduced in court, Emmanuel began experiencing difficulties with feeding, vomiting large amounts after consuming the formula that had been available through assistance. In the absence of renewed vouchers and amid the ongoing challenges of post-evacuation life, Tiffany Woods made the decision to switch the infant to diluted organic cow's milk purchased from local stores, a choice she would later describe in parole proceedings as one born of desperation and survival mode rather than malice. The rented house in Shreveport was described by investigators as relatively tidy with a refrigerator containing home-cooked meals, cartons of the organic milk, baby food items, and other household goods including some adult beverages. Over the following weeks, Emmanuel's condition deteriorated noticeably as he became increasingly sleepy and struggled to retain nourishment, gaining only about 7 ounces across roughly 41 days in the new location, according to subsequent medical assessments. No medical care was sought during this period despite the availability of emergency services and support resources extended to Katrina evacuees in the Shreveport area. On November the 27th, 2005, approximately 90 days after the family's arrival, Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott discovered the 5-month-old unresponsive in his crib and immediately contacted emergency services. Paramedics responded, but the infant could not be revived, and an autopsy performed by a forensic pathologist determined the cause of death to be malnutrition with associated dehydration. The examination revealed an emaciated frame with thin limbs and a sunken abdomen, though debates later arose in legal proceedings regarding whether an undiagnosed or incompletely evaluated metabolic issue, such as the screen medium-chain acyl coenzyme, a dehydrogenase deficiency, may have contributed, with experts noting that liver analysis alone cannot confirm such conditions and that full genetic testing had never been completed post-discharge. Police from the Shreveport Department conducted interviews with both parents, documenting their accounts of the feeding changes and the chaotic circumstances surrounding their displacement. In September 2006, the Caddo Parish District Attorney's Office filed charges of second-degree murder against Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott under Louisiana Revised Statute 14:30.1, a statute broad enough to encompass deaths resulting from cruelty to a juvenile even in the absence of proven intent to kill. The couple opted for a joint bench trial before Judge Jeanette Garrett rather than a jury proceeding, with court-appointed defense attorneys presenting arguments centered on the overwhelming pressures of poverty, displacement, lack of adequate hospital guidance regarding the infant's needs, and the absence of understanding that the situation had become life-threatening. Prosecutors, led by Assistant District Attorney Brady O'Callahan, countered by emphasizing that the family had resided in Shreveport long enough to access available aid, that resources had been allocated specifically for evacuees, and that funds appeared allocated toward other household items, while medical intervention was not pursued despite visible decline. Evidence introduced included autopsy photographs described by the judge as haunting, police observations of the home environment, and testimony highlighting inconsistencies in timelines provided during initial statements. The bench trial concluded in 2008 with Judge Garrett delivering a verdict of guilty on the second-degree murder charges for both defendants, stating in her ruling that there existed no excuse for allowing the infant to reach such a state in a location where support systems were actively reaching out to those affected by the hurricane. Both Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott received the mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Appeals followed, with the Louisiana Second Circuit Court of Appeal affirming the convictions and sentences in August 2009, underscoring once again the lack of justification for the outcome observed. Emmanuel Scott was later transferred to the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola following an unrelated disciplinary matter, while Tiffany Woods remained at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, where she pursued education, earning a bachelor's degree through a seminary program and beginning work toward a master's. Over the years, Woods expressed accountability in various statements, telling interviewers and parole officials that she recognized the devastating impact of her choices made under extreme duress and that she carried the weight of the loss daily. In 2021 reporting, her surviving children, now adults, spoke of the ripple effects including foster care placements and the emotional toll of public perception, with one son noting the absence of consideration for the siblings left behind when their parents were incarcerated. By August 2023, following a recommendation from the Louisiana Board of Pardons and Parole, then Governor John Bell Edwards commuted the original life sentence to a term allowing for potential release eligibility, acknowledging the unique contextual factors of the post-disaster environment while still upholding the legal determination of responsibility. Tiffany Woods became eligible for parole consideration in September 2026 under the adjusted 36-year framework accounting for good time credits. The most recent development occurred on February 10, 2026, during a parole hearing conducted via video from the women's facility. Appearing in standard blue prison scrubs at age 46, Woods wept as she recounted the sequence, stating, quote, "I did not know what to do. I made the devastating decision to change my child's milk, and he was taking his milk. I thought he was doing better, but he was not doing better. I did not know how to go about anything. But survival mode, I know he is gone. Because of me, I did not mean to take his life," unquote. Her son, Nyejon Woods, now an adult serving in the Air Force and speaking from California, advocated for release, telling the board, quote, "It is my belief that we all need her children. We all serve the sentence with our mom," unquote. Board members Daniel Barris and Jerry Ledoux voted in favor, citing Wood's status as a first offender, exemplary conduct with no disciplinary infractions, completion of rehabilitation programs, low-risk assessment scores, and solid reentry plans supported by the Louisiana Parole Project. However, member Carolyn Stapleton cast the sole opposing vote, referencing persistent opposition from the Caddo Parish District Attorney's Office, the graphic condition depicted in autopsy materials, and the overall circumstances, stating that despite remarkable personal growth, she could not support parole at that time. With unanimity required, the petition was denied, meaning Woods must wait 5 years before reapplying and faces continued incarceration unless future reviews alter the path. This case, rooted entirely in the documented displacement following Hurricane Katrina, the medical vulnerabilities of a premature infant, the resource strains of evacuation, and the judicial application of Louisiana's felony murder adjacent provisions for juvenile cruelty, illustrates how extraordinary events can intersect with everyday parental decisions to produce outcomes examined at length in appellate courts and parole proceedings. The records from Tulane Hospital, Shreveport police interviews, the 2008 bench trial transcript, the 2009 appellate affirmation, and the 2026 parole board minutes form the complete factual basis without reliance on speculation. Case 4. Twyena Thomas. Moving forward several years to the fall of 2017, our focus shifts to Kenner in Jefferson Parish, a suburban community adjacent to New Orleans where daily routines in multi-child households proceeded until a single emergency call on September the 30th brought authorities face to face with evidence of prolonged neglect and injury in one specific residence. Twyena Thomas, then 27 years old and known in some records by the variant spelling Twynia, was the mother of 4 children including her 28-month-old son Chase Thomas, with a 5th child on the way at the time of the events in question. The family occupied an apartment where the other siblings were also present, and relatives later reported having seen Chase as recently as approximately 1 month earlier appearing cheerful, with a healthy appetite and no visible signs of medical distress. On the evening of September the 30th, 2017, Thomas placed a 911 call reporting that her toddler was experiencing difficulty breathing. Kenner police and emergency medical personnel arrived promptly to find Chase unresponsive and cold to the touch, with first responders determining that he had likely been deceased for more than 30 minutes prior to their arrival. The child was transported to a medical facility but pronounced dead on scene effectively, and the Jefferson Parish Coroner's Office assumed jurisdiction for a full autopsy the following morning. That examination, conducted by forensic pathologists under coroner Dr. Jerry Kvitanovich, revealed a child weighing only 15 pounds, dramatically below the typical range of 28 to 30 pounds expected for a boy of his age, with his body exhibiting the skeletal appearance of severe malnutrition and dehydration described by one paramedic on scene as resembling an Egyptian mummy, dry and withered away with skin stretched tightly over bones and visible ribcage contours. Further documentation from the autopsy cataloged extensive external and internal injuries, including widespread bruising covering areas from around the eyes down the full length of both arms and legs, across the back and buttocks, along with multiple cuts, scabs, scars, and ligature marks on the left forearm consistent with restraint. Only 3 small regions of the body remained free of trauma, specifically the toes, genitals, and rectal area. The official cause of death was determined to be multiple blunt force trauma to the head, torso, and extremities resulting in a brain bleed, with the extreme malnourishment and dehydration classified as significant contributing factors, though the primary mechanism was the head trauma. Dr. Kvitanovich publicly characterized the case as the worst he had personally encountered in his career, labeling the death a homicide based on the pattern of injuries inconsistent with accidental injury or natural disease. Kenner police initiated an immediate investigation, interviewing Thomas and examining the apartment environment, which contained evidence of meals prepared and consumed by the mother and other children, including social media posts depicting foods such as sloppy joes, eggs, sausage, and grits shared among the siblings, while Chase had been denied equivalent access, according to prosecutorial summaries. Initial booking on October 2, 2017 charged Thomas with cruelty to a juvenile, but following autopsy results, the Jefferson Parish District Attorney's Office upgraded the count to second-degree murder, citing the combination of sustained starvation, physical beatings, and isolation from family contact and routine medical appointments after an earlier failure to thrive notation in pediatric records. Thomas was held without bond as the case proceeded through pretrial phases, with defense counsel arguing elements of financial strain, possible maternal depression, and lack of deliberate intent to cause death. The matter reached trial in the 24th Judicial District Court in Gretna during August 2019, spanning 3 days of testimony before a Jefferson Parish jury. Prosecutors Matthew Whitworth and Jenny Voss presented evidence including the autopsy photographs and reports, paramedic observations, relative statements confirming Chase's normal appearance and appetite in prior months, and documentation of the mother's selective feeding practices contrasted against her own documented meals. Paramedic Rogelio Lopez testified to the shocking visual state of the child upon removal from the residence, while cousin Quina Hebert and other family members described the last sightings of an active toddler unaware of any ongoing issues. The defense maintained that Thomas, overwhelmed as a single parent managing multiple children, had not recognized the severity or formed the specific intent required under certain interpretations, though the jury deliberated for only 30 minutes on August the 22nd before returning a unanimous verdict of guilty as charged on second-degree murder. Sentencing occurred on September the 30th, 2019, precisely the 2-year anniversary of Chase's death, before Judge Danielle Taylor. The court heard victim impact statements from 2 witnesses and reviewed 6 additional letters from affected parties before allowing Thomas a brief opportunity to address the bench, during which she acknowledged that Chase did not deserve what occurred. Judge Taylor, in imposing the mandatory life sentence without benefit of probation, parole, or suspension, delivered pointed remarks describing Thomas as a hateful monster who had transformed her role from protector to source of cruelty, rage, anger, torture, and torment for the child. The judge expressed a wish that an image of Chase's condition could remain visible in Thomas's cell daily as a constant reminder, concluding that the defendant merited not even a scintilla of mercy given the evidence of prolonged torment inflicted upon a defenseless toddler in the very home where he should have been safest. Twyena Thomas was remanded to serve the life term at a Louisiana State Correctional Facility, and as of the latest available public records, the conviction and sentence have stood without successful reversal on appeal. The Jefferson Parish investigation files, coroner's autopsy report detailing the 15-pound weight and blunt force injuries, trial transcripts capturing the 30-minute jury deliberation, and the sentencing hearing minutes, including the judge's characterization, constitute the verified foundation for this account, drawn directly from official sources and major regional reporting without external interpretation. Case 5. Hannah Barker. The community of Natchitoches Parish in central Louisiana, known for its historic district and quiet rural stretches dotted with trailer parks and railroad lines, experienced a series of events on July 17, 2018 that began with 2 separate 911 calls reporting a possible kidnapping from a residence in the area. Hannah Nicole Barker, then 22 years old and living in a mobile home with her 6-month-old son Levi Cole Ellerby, told responding officers from the Natchitoches Police Department that 2 unknown men had forced their way into the residence, sprayed her with mace, engaged in a physical struggle, and fled with the infant while she escaped to seek help. Barker appeared outwardly calm during the initial interview, according to police observations later entered into the record, showing little visible distress over the reported abduction of her child. Levi Cole Ellerby had been born on December 20, 2017 to Barker and his father Billy Ellerby Jr., and the infant had been residing with his mother in the trailer park setting near Breda Avenue at the time of the reported incident. Within hours, authorities located the body of the 6-month-old in a roadside ditch alongside railroad tracks not far from the family residence. The infant had been doused with gasoline and set ablaze, sustaining second- and third-degree burns over approximately 90% of his small body. The Louisiana State Fire Marshal's Office and Natchitoches Parish investigators processed the scene, recovering evidence consistent with the use of an accelerant and confirming through forensic examination that the burns were the direct cause of death. Autopsy findings documented the extent of thermal injury and ruled the manner of death homicide. Further inquiry quickly centered on Barker's girlfriend Felicia Marie Nicole Smith, 25 years old at the time, who was arrested on July 21, 2018, and charged with first-degree murder in connection with the killing. Smith was accused of removing the infant from the residence, transporting him to the ditch location, pouring gasoline over him, igniting the fire, and then proceeding to her workplace as if the events had not occurred. Police interviews and subsequent investigation revealed that Barker had allegedly enlisted Smith to carry out the act, reportedly due to ongoing frustration with the infant's crying and other domestic pressures within the household. On July 25, 2018, Barker herself was taken into custody and booked into the Natchitoches Parish Detention Center on the charge of principal to first-degree murder, with an additional count of criminal conspiracy added shortly thereafter. The state of Louisiana filed formal notice in 2019 of its intent to seek the death penalty against Barker should she be convicted at trial, citing the particularly heinous nature of the crime involving a vulnerable infant. The case generated significant local and regional attention, prompting a change of venue considerations and multiple continuances, with Barker's trial initially scheduled for earlier dates but ultimately moved into 2022 to allow for full preparation of evidence and witness lists. During the pretrial phase, prosecutors presented evidence including the 911 recordings, Barker's initial statements about the alleged intruders, forensic analysis of the burn scene, witness accounts from the trailer park, and communications between Barker and Smith that allegedly demonstrated planning and coordination. Defense counsel for Barker argued elements of duress, mental health considerations, and lack of direct physical participation in the final act, though the state maintained that Barker's role as the person directing the events made her equally culpable under Louisiana law governing principles and conspirators. After extensive negotiations and further delays, Barker entered a guilty plea to reduced charges of manslaughter, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and cruelty to a juvenile. The plea agreement, accepted by the court, resulted in a sentence of 30 years at hard labor to be served in a Louisiana state correctional facility. As of the latest available public records through 2026, Barker remains incarcerated under that term, with no successful appeals or early release noted in court dockets. Felicia Smith faced separate proceedings on the first-degree murder charge, though her ultimate disposition is documented independently in parish records. The Natchitoches community reacted with widespread shock to the details as they emerged through official channels, with local reporting capturing the contrast between the peaceful rural setting and the brutality described in charging documents. Coroner and fire marshal reports, police affidavits detailing the mace spray claim versus the actual sequence, autopsy photographs referenced but not publicly released due to their graphic content, and the plea colloquy transcript formed the complete factual foundation for this account, all preserved in the 25th Judicial District Court and available through standard public access procedures. No additional speculation is required or included, as the judicial outcome rests entirely on the evidence presented and accepted by the court. Case 6. Sheila Fletcher. Several years later, on the morning of January 3, 2022, emergency dispatchers in East Feliciana Parish received a 911 call from 66-year-old Sheila Fletcher reporting that her 36-year-old daughter Lacey Ellen Fletcher had been discovered deceased inside the family residence at 2568 Tom Drive in the small town of Slaughter, Louisiana. Slaughter, a community of fewer than 1,000 residents located near the Mississippi border and known for its quiet suburban character, became the site of one of the most extensively documented cases of prolonged neglect in recent state history when first responders entered the Fletcher home and encountered the scene described in coroner and police reports. Lacey Ellen Fletcher, born on November the 25th, 1985, had been diagnosed with severe autism and agoraphobia, conditions that, according to family statements, had led her to remain almost exclusively on the living room couch for approximately 12 years prior to her death, refusing to leave the spot for bathing, medical care, or even basic movement. The body of Lacey Fletcher was found sunken into a deep crater formed in the fabric of the couch, literally adhered to the material through accumulated biological waste. Coroner Dr. Ewell DeWitt Bickham III, a 30-year veteran, responded to the scene and later described the conditions as the most horrific he had encountered in his career, noting the presence of maggots actively feeding on the remains, extensive pressure ulcers and bedsores that had eroded through skin and tissue down to bone in multiple areas, and an overall state of emaciation. Lacey weighed only 96 pounds at the time of discovery, far below any healthy range for an adult woman of her stature. The autopsy conducted in the days following determined the cause of death to be a combination of severe medical neglect, starvation, dehydration, and sepsis stemming from untreated infections, with the manner of death classified as homicide. The stomach contents reportedly included fragments of fecal matter and pieces of the couch cushion itself, indicating the length of time the individual had been unable or unwilling to receive proper sustenance or hygiene. Sheila Fletcher, who at the time served as a town alderman in Slaughter, and her husband Clay Fletcher, employed at a nearby nuclear power facility, were both present or had recently returned to the residence when the 911 call was placed. Initial statements to investigators indicated that the couple had believed their daughter's extreme anxiety and autism prevented her from accepting care, that she refused to be moved or bathed, and that they had attempted various forms of assistance over the years without success. However, the physical evidence documented by police photographers and the coroner's team painted a picture of complete isolation from medical services, bathing facilities, and nutritional support for more than a decade, during which time the parents continued their own daily routines, including employment and community involvement. The residence itself was described in reports as outwardly well-maintained with a manicured lawn, contrasting sharply with the interior conditions observed in the living room. East Feliciana Parish authorities, under District Attorney Sam DeQuilla, launched a full investigation that included interviews with relatives, review of any prior welfare checks, and forensic analysis of the couch and surrounding area. On May 2, 2022, a grand jury returned indictments charging both Sheila and Clay Fletcher with second-degree murder. Those initial charges were later dismissed by a judge due to technical wording issues in the indictment document, prompting the district attorney to present the case to a second grand jury. In June 2023, a new indictment was issued on the same second-degree murder counts. After further pretrial proceedings and negotiations, on February 5, 2024, both parents entered no contest pleas to the reduced charge of manslaughter in the 20th Judicial District Court in Clinton. The plea agreement was accepted, and sentencing took place on March 20, 2024, before the presiding judge. At the sentencing hearing, each parent was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with 20 of those years suspended, resulting in 20 years to serve, followed by 5 years of supervised probation upon release. Victim impact statements and letters from community members were considered, along with the couple's expressions of remorse and explanations centered on the challenges of caring for a severely disabled adult child who resisted all intervention. The judge acknowledged the complexity of the mental health factors while emphasizing the prolonged nature of the neglect that led to the outcome. As of February 2026, the sentences remain in effect, with both Sheila and Clay Fletcher incarcerated in Louisiana state facilities. The district attorney's office, coroner's detailed autopsy report listing the 96-pound weight and maggot infestation, police scene documentation, grand jury transcripts, and the 2024 plea and sentencing minutes constitute the verified public record upon which this narration rests exclusively. Photographs of the scene have remained largely sealed from public release due to their disturbing content, though descriptions provided in open court and official statements have been widely reported. The case prompted discussions within East Feliciana Parish and beyond regarding recognition of adult neglect in cases involving disabled family members, though again we confine every detail to what appears in the court filings and contemporaneous news accounts from reputable outlets. No broader commentary is offered, as the judicial system rendered its determination based on the evidence presented. Case 7. Whitney Ard. In the spring and summer months of 2022, the city of Baton Rouge and surrounding East Baton Rouge Parish confronted the growing impact of the fentanyl epidemic when a 2-year-old boy named Mitchell Robinson III became the focal point of multiple emergency responses that ultimately ended in tragedy. Whitney Ard, then a young mother residing in the parish, faced charges that would later result in a second-degree murder conviction after her son succumbed to a fentanyl overdose following a series of prior incidents in which the child had required revival. According to the Office of the State Inspector General report issued under case number 22-010-I and released in March 2024, Mitchell had been the subject of prior child welfare involvement, with the report later highlighting systemic shortcomings in oversight that contributed to broader discussions and personnel changes at the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services. The Inspector General's findings detailed how the toddler had experienced at least 2 documented non-fatal fentanyl exposures in the weeks leading up to his death, each time requiring medical intervention to revive him before being returned to the home environment. On the date of the fatal incident in 2022, emergency personnel responded to the residence after Mitchell was found unresponsive for the 3rd time. Autopsy examination conducted by the East Baton Rouge Parish Coroner's Office confirmed the presence of fentanyl in the child's system at a level of 14 nanograms per milliliter, a concentration determined to be lethal for a child of his age and size, with the official cause of death listed as acute fentanyl intoxication. Investigators from the Baton Rouge Police Department and collaborating agencies documented the scene, interviewed family members, and reviewed prior medical records from the previous overdose events where Mitchell had been stabilized at local hospitals but released back into the same household. Court records from the 19th Judicial District Court indicate that Whitney Ard was present during these incidents, and that on at least one prior occasion the child had been placed in bed rather than immediately transported for further evaluation despite visible signs of distress. Prosecutors later argued in pretrial motions and at trial that the repeated pattern demonstrated a failure to protect that rose to the level of second-degree murder under Louisiana statutes governing cruelty to juveniles resulting in death. Whitney Ard was arrested and formally charged with second-degree murder in connection with Mitchell's death. The case proceeded through the 19th Judicial District Court in Baton Rouge with extensive pretrial litigation that included motions for a new trial filed by defense counsel citing various procedural points. Jury selection and testimony unfolded over several days with evidence presented including toxicology reports, prior medical records detailing the 2 earlier revivals, scene photographs, and testimony from first responders and medical personnel who had treated the child during the preceding incidents. The defense maintained that external factors and systemic issues played a significant role, pointing to the Office of Inspector General findings that later criticized aspects of the child welfare response, while the prosecution emphasized the mandatory nature of the charge when a juvenile death results from sustained exposure under a caregiver's supervision. After deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the second-degree murder count. Sentencing took place on October 21, 2024, before a judge in the 19th Judicial District Court. Whitney Ard, described in contemporary reporting as 31 years old at the time, was ordered to serve life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence for second-degree murder in Louisiana when no lesser options apply. The courtroom heard statements from family members on both sides, with the biological father's relatives expressing ongoing grief over the loss of the toddler who had been revived twice only to succumb on the 3rd exposure. Whitney Ard was remanded immediately to begin serving the term at a state correctional facility. As of February 2026, the conviction and sentence stand with no successful appeals noted in public dockets, and the case remains a referenced example in discussions of opioid-related child fatalities within the parish. The full investigative file, autopsy conclusions, Inspector General report, trial minutes, and sentencing order from the 19th Judicial District Court provide the complete verified foundation for this account, drawn directly from those sources without addition. The circumstances surrounding Mitchell Robinson III's death prompted the Office of Inspector General to conduct a comprehensive review that examined interactions between the family and child protective services leading up to the fatal overdose. That report, publicly released in March 2024, outlined multiple points of contact and recommendations that were not fully implemented, contributing to broader administrative reviews at the Department of Children and Family Services. While the judicial outcome for Whitney rested solely on the criminal evidence presented at trial, the Inspector General findings added context to the public discourse without altering the legal determination of guilt. Baton Rouge media outlets covered each stage from initial arrest through sentencing, consistently citing court records and official statements to ensure accuracy in their reporting. Case 8. Bunnock Hannah Landon. Turning to the spring of 2023, we shift to Harahan in Jefferson Parish, a suburban community just west of New Orleans where routine family custody arrangements turned into a homicide investigation after the discovery of a 6-year-old girl's body in a container left on a residential lawn. Bunnock Hannah Landon, also known in records as Bunnock Lim and Hannah Landon, was the girlfriend of the child's father following his separation from the biological mother. The victim, 6-year-old Bella Fontenelle, had been spending time in accordance with custody arrangements when events on a date in April 2023 led to her death by blunt force trauma and strangulation. According to the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office investigation detailed in arrest affidavits and later trial exhibits, Landon beat and strangled the child inside a residence before placing the body into a 5 to 10-gallon chlorine bucket, loading the container onto a wagon, and transporting it to the biological mother's home in Harahan, where it was left on the front lawn for the mother to discover. Neighboring security cameras captured the sequence as Landon pulled the wagon along Donnellan and Sedgefield drives, providing critical video evidence that was introduced at trial. The biological mother found the bucket containing her daughter's remains and immediately contacted authorities, prompting a rapid response by Jefferson Parish Sheriff's deputies who secured the scene, recovered the body, and initiated a homicide investigation. Autopsy examination confirmed the cause of death as a combination of multiple blunt force injuries and manual strangulation, with the manner of death ruled homicide. Detectives traced the wagon and bucket movements through the surveillance footage and located Landon shortly thereafter, leading to her arrest on first-degree murder charges along with 2 counts of obstruction of justice for actions taken to conceal the crime. The case was assigned to the 24th Judicial District Court in Gretna, with prosecutors from the Jefferson Parish District Attorney's Office building a file that included the video evidence, forensic analysis of the bucket and wagon, witness statements from family members describing the custody dynamics, and medical testimony on the injuries sustained by Bella Fontenelle. Landon's defense team presented an insanity defense during the trial that began in late April 2025. Arguing that the defendant had been experiencing a psychotic episode at the time of the events. Over several days of testimony, the state called Bella's parents and grandmother to describe the child's final hours and the devastating discovery, while forensic experts detailed the physical evidence inconsistent with any accidental scenario. Closing arguments concluded on May 1, 2025, after which the jury deliberated for 45 minutes or less before rejecting the insanity defense and returning unanimous guilty verdicts on first-degree murder and both obstruction of justice counts. Sentencing occurred on May 6, 2025, in the same Gretna courtroom. Jefferson Parish judge presiding over the matter described the crime as evil on full display and imposed the mandatory life imprisonment without benefit of parole or probation for the first-degree murder conviction. In addition, the court added 80 years for the 2 obstruction of justice charges, to be served consecutively. Victim impact statements from Bella's biological mother, father, and other relatives were read into the record, conveying the profound and ongoing loss experienced by the family. Bunnock Hannah Landon was remanded to serve the combined sentence at a Louisiana State Correctional Facility. As of February 2026, the convictions and sentences remain in full effect with no reversal on appeal reported in court records. The Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office investigative file, surveillance video exhibits, autopsy report, trial transcripts spanning the insanity defense presentation and 45-minute deliberation, and the May 6, 2025 sentencing minutes form the exhaustive public record upon which this narration is constructed. The trial revealed additional background details, including how Landon had met the child's father at a conference in Gulfport, Mississippi after the parents' separation, where she was known by the names Valentina and Hannah in some social contexts. Opening statements painted a portrait of the custody tensions and the calculated steps taken after the killing to transport and deposit the remains in a manner intended to inflict further emotional harm on the biological mother. The jury's swift rejection of the insanity claim after hearing expert testimony on Landon's mental state at the time underscored the strength of the state's evidence centered on the video, forensics, and timeline. Jefferson Parish media provided daily coverage throughout the proceedings, quoting directly from court documents and official statements to maintain factual precision. The case concluded with the judicial determination that Hannah, Landon acted with full awareness and intent, resulting in the maximum penalties available under Louisiana law. Case 9. Amy Hebert. In the small unincorporated community of Matthews located in Lafourche Parish, Louisiana, a region characterized by its winding waterways, modest family homes, and a sense of tight-knit Southern living that often masks underlying personal struggles, a 40-year-old woman named Amy Talbot Hebert awakened in the early morning hours of August 20, 2007, to what she later described in court proceedings as a commanding male voice instructing her to take drastic actions to preserve her family unit. Amy Hebert, who had been married to Chad Hebert for more than a decade and shared 2 children with him, a 9-year-old daughter named Camille Catherine Hebert born in 1998 and a 7-year-old son named Braxton John Hebert born in 2000, had finalized a divorce from Chad approximately 1 year earlier, in 2006, following the revelation of his extramarital affair with a co-worker named Kimberly. The dissolution of the marriage had been marked by escalating tensions, particularly surrounding custody arrangements, child support obligations, and the children's growing bond with Kimberly, as Chad's relationship with her advanced toward plans for a wedding scheduled in 2008. Amy, who worked as a homemaker and occasional elementary school aide, had been awarded primary custody of Camille and Braxton, with Chad exercising visitation rights, and the family home in Matthews remaining under Amy's occupancy post-divorce. According to the factual summary provided in the Louisiana First Circuit Court of Appeal opinion issued on September 23, 2011 under docket number 2010 K0305, on the night leading into August 20, Amy Hebert reportedly experienced auditory hallucinations that she attributed to divine intervention or external forces compelling her to ensure that her children would not be separated from her through Chad's new life. She retrieved multiple kitchen knives from the home's utility area and proceeded to the children's bedrooms, where she inflicted repeated stab wounds upon each child while they slept. Forensic examination conducted by the Lafourche Parish Coroner's Office detailed the extent of the injuries, with Braxton sustaining approximately 20 to 25 stab wounds to his chest region and 50 to 55 stab wounds to his back area, resulting in fatal blood loss as the primary cause of death. Camille endured approximately 30 to 35 stab wounds to her chest and an equivalent 30 to 35 stab wounds to her back, likewise succumbing to exsanguination from the multiple penetrations. In addition to the attacks on the children, Amy Hebert also stabbed the family dog to death during the same sequence of events, leaving its body in the master bedroom alongside the children, whom she positioned in the bed after the assaults. Following the stabbings, Amy Hebert turned the knives upon herself, inflicting approximately 30 self-inflicted wounds primarily to her own chest and abdomen in an apparent suicide attempt that did not prove fatal. She then composed 2 blood-stained notes discovered later at the scene, one addressed to Chad expressing resentment over his choices and stating, quote, "You wanted your own life, you got it, I'll be damned. If you get the kids too, your ambition and greed for money won out over your love for your family. The hell you put us through. And I do mean all of us, because you don't know what the kids used to go through, because of course you weren't here. This is no kind of life for them to live," unquote. And another note directed to her parents, conveying a sense of finality and sorrow. The discovery of the scene occurred the following morning on August 20th, when the children's paternal grandparents R.J. Buck Hebert and Judy Hebert grew concerned after failing to receive responses to their attempts to contact Amy and the children. Buck Hebert accessed the residence by breaking into the utility room through a window, where he observed blood splatters on the kitchen and dining area floors before proceeding to the master bedroom, and encountering the blood-soaked bed containing Amy, the deceased children, and the dog. Unable to exit through the dead bolted doors without keys, Buck summoned assistance, leading to the arrival of Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office deputies, who forced entry through the kitchen door. Upon entering the master bedroom, deputies encountered Amy Hebert, who raised a large knife in her right hand and shouted commands for them to leave the premises, prompting the use of a taser electroshock device to disarm her and facilitate the removal of the children for medical assessment, though both were already deceased. Paramedics confirmed the absence of vital signs in Camille and Braxton, while Amy was transported to a medical facility for treatment of her injuries. The Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office Homicide Division assumed lead on the investigation, processing the crime scene, collecting the blood-stained notes as evidence, and interviewing family members, including Chad Hebert, who provided context on the acrimonious divorce and ongoing disputes. Amy Hebert was arrested upon her medical stabilization and initially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder under Louisiana Revised Statute 14:30, with the District Attorney's Office under Cam Morvant II filing formal charges through a grand jury indictment. Amy Hebert entered a plea of not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity, asserting through her defense counsel that she had been experiencing severe mental health deterioration in the months preceding the events, exacerbated by the divorce, financial pressures, and perceived threats to her parental role. A sanity commission was appointed by the 17th Judicial District Court in Thibodaux, consisting of mental health experts who evaluated Hebert over several sessions. During these evaluations, as documented in trial testimony, Hebert described hearing a taunting male voice on the day of the offenses, repeating phrases such as, quote, "He's going to take the children, he's going to take them," unquote, and instructing her to kill the children and herself to keep the family intact for entry into heaven, with specific directives to target the heads or brains. For defense, experts testified at trial supporting a diagnosis of severe depression with psychotic features, concluding that Hebert lacked the capacity to distinguish right from wrong at the moment of the acts. However, state experts, including Dr. George Sidon and Dr. Rafael Salcedo, countered that while Hebert exhibited depressive symptoms, her actions demonstrated premeditation, organization, and awareness, as evidenced by the notes, the selection of multiple knives, and the post-act positioning of the bodies, which they argued were inconsistent with a fully delusional state. The trial commenced in May 2009 before a jury in the 17th Judicial District Court, with prosecutors presenting physical evidence, including crime scene photographs, autopsy reports detailing the 100-plus total stab wounds across both children, blood spatter analysis indicating the attacks occurred in the bedrooms before relocation to the master bed, and the incriminating notes establishing motive tied to revenge against the ex-husband. Defense arguments centered on the insanity plea, highlighting Hebert's history of no prior violence, her role as a devoted mother prior to the divorce, and the expert opinions on her psychotic break. After several days of testimony, including emotional accounts from family members on both sides, the jury deliberated and on May 14, 2009, returned verdicts of guilty on both counts of first-degree murder, rejecting the insanity defense based on the presumption of sanity under Louisiana Code of Criminal Procedure Article 652, which places the burden on the defendant to prove insanity by a preponderance of evidence. The penalty phase followed immediately, with the same jury considering aggravating factors such as the vulnerability of the young victims and the heinous nature of the crimes versus mitigating elements, including Hebert's mental health struggles and lack of criminal history. After hearing additional testimony, including wrenching victim impact statements from Chad Hebert and the grandparents, the jury deliberated on the sentencing recommendation but failed to reach unanimity on the death penalty, with reports indicating a split vote that prevented the required unanimous decision for capital punishment. Consequently, on May 19, 2009, the court imposed the alternative sentence of life imprisonment without the benefit of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence on each count, to be served consecutively at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. Amy Hebert pursued direct appeals through the Louisiana First Circuit Court of Appeal, which affirmed the convictions and sentences on September 23, 2011, citing sufficient evidence for the jury to rationally conclude sanity, including the motive-driven notes and organized cover-up attempts. The Louisiana Supreme Court denied writs on March 9, 2012 under docket number 2011 K0833, solidifying the state-level direct review. Subsequent post-conviction relief efforts in state court included claims of ineffective assistance of counsel, particularly regarding failure to object to the state's use of peremptory strikes allegedly discriminating against female jurors in violation of J.B. v. Alabama ex rel. TB, as well as challenges to the sufficiency of evidence on sanity and the warrantless seizure of the blood-stained notes under plain view doctrine exceptions. The 17th Judicial District Court denied these applications in a written decision, with the Louisiana First Circuit and Supreme Court upholding the denials through 2014. Federal habeas corpus proceedings under Title 28 United States Code Section 2254 commenced in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Louisiana in 2015 docket number 15-4950, where Hebert raised similar grounds, including the peremptory strike issue and sanity determination. The district court denied relief on February 21, 2017, finding no violation of clearly established federal law under the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act standards, with Magistrate Judge Joseph C. Wilkinson Jr.'s report and recommendation adopted by District Judge Lance M. Frick. Appeals to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit followed under docket number 17-30191, where a three-judge panel, including Chief Judge Carl E. Stewart, Judge Edith Brown Clement, and Judge Leslie H. Southwick, affirmed the denial on May 10, 2018, concluding that Hebert failed to demonstrate discriminatory intent in the peremptory strikes, or that her counsel's performance fell below objective reasonableness, and that the jury had rational basis to reject the insanity defense given conflicting expert testimony and evidence of motive. A petition for certiorari to the United States Supreme Court was denied on April 1, 2019 under docket number 18-6306, marking the exhaustion of all available avenues and confirming the life sentences. As of February 2026, Amy Hebert remains incarcerated at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, serving the consecutive life terms with no pending challenges noted in federal or state dockets. The Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office investigative reports coroner's autopsy findings detailing the stab wound counts and causes of death, the 17th Judicial District Court trial transcripts, encompassing the May 2009 proceedings, appellate opinions from the First Circuit and Fifth Circuit, and the United States Supreme Court denial order constitute the full verified record underpinning this narration without external additions. Case 10. Kristin Bass. Advancing nearly 2 decades to the start of a new year in the industrial town of Sulphur, situated in Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana, a community known for its proximity to petrochemical facilities, modest residential neighborhoods, and a population that values family-oriented traditions amid the challenges of modern life, a 28-year-old mother named Kristin Bass became the subject of a homicide investigation following a domestic incident on January 1, 2026 that resulted in the death of her 1-year-old daughter. Sulphur Police Department officers responded to a residence on Quelquesha Street shortly after 8 o'clock in the evening on New Year's Day, after receiving reports of a shooting involving a child. Upon arrival, first responders encountered a chaotic scene where the child's father, Bradley Moss, informed authorities that he had heard a loud boom resembling a gunshot and rushed into a room to discover Bass holding a firearm, while their 2-year-old daughter cried nearby, and the 1-year-old lay unresponsive with a visible head wound. The victim, identified by Bradley Moss as Aislinn Moss, born approximately in 2024, had sustained a single gunshot wound to the head determined by preliminary medical assessment to be fatal. Emergency medical personnel attempted life-saving measures, but Aislinn was pronounced deceased at the scene, with the Calcasieu Parish Coroner's Office later confirming the cause of death as acute penetrating trauma from the gunshot consistent with homicide manner. Bradley Moss provided an initial statement to investigators as documented in Sulphur Police Department reports, recounting that upon entering the room, he confronted Bass, who allegedly stated words to the effect of, quote, "I just sent our baby to God," unquote, or, quote, "her mama wanted to send her to God," unquote, suggesting a deliberate act motivated by an intent to end the child's life in a perceived spiritual context. The 2-year-old sibling present during the events was unharmed physically but witnessed elements of the incident, prompting immediate involvement from the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services, which assumed temporary custody of the older child to ensure safety amid the unfolding investigation. Kristin Bass was detained at the scene and transported to the Sulphur Police Department headquarters for questioning, where she was formally arrested on January 1, 2026, and charged with 1 count of first-degree murder under Louisiana Revised Statute 14:30 subsection, a paragraph 2 subparagraph C, which addresses murders committed upon victims under the age of 12. The charging decision by the Calcasieu Parish District Attorney's Office reflected the vulnerability of the victim and the apparent premeditation or specific intent inferred from the circumstances. Bass was booked into the Calcasieu Correctional Center with bond set at $10 million during an initial court appearance on January 5, 2026, before a judge in the 14th Judicial District Court in Lake Charles who deemed the high amount appropriate given the severity of the offense and potential flight risk. Prosecutors indicated in early statements to media outlets, including KPLC-TV, that the case would proceed through grand jury review for formal indictment, with considerations for aggravating factors that could influence sentencing options, including the possibility of seeking the death penalty, though no final determination had been announced as of February 2026. The investigation led by Sulphur Police Department Major Jason Gully involved processing the Quelqueshu Street residence for ballistic evidence, recovering the firearm believed to be the weapon used, a handgun registered within the household, and collecting witness statements from Bradley Moss, and potentially the 2-year-old if deemed appropriate, through child forensic interview protocols. Forensic analysis conducted by the Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Office Crime Lab confirmed the projectile's trajectory and matched it to the recovered weapon, while toxicology screenings on Aislinn were pending to rule out any contributing substances, though initial indications pointed solely to the gunshot as causative. Bradley Moss spoke publicly through interviews with outlets such as Fox 8 and KPLC-TV, expressing profound grief over the loss of Aislinn, describing her as a joyful infant who had just begun walking and vocalizing and lamenting the sudden shattering of their family unit on what should have been a celebratory day. He further alleged that Bass had exhibited signs of emotional distress in the preceding weeks, potentially tied to relationship strains or postpartum challenges, though these claims remain unverified in official records and are subject to ongoing inquiry. As the case remains in pretrial stages with a grand jury presentation scheduled for early March 2026, prosecutors have filed motions to preserve evidence, including digital records from Bass's electronic devices, which may contain communications or searches relevant to motive. Defense counsel appointed from the Calcasieu Parish Public Defender's Office has entered a preliminary not guilty plea on Bass's behalf and requested mental health evaluations to assess competency for trial, potentially exploring diminished capacity or insanity defenses based on the reported statements about sending the child to God, which could indicate delusional thinking. Community response in Sulphur has included vigils organized by local churches and support groups for Bradley Moss and the surviving sibling, with residents expressing shock in interviews with the Beaumont Enterprise and Simla Now over the rarity of such intrafamilial violence in their town. The Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services has initiated a review of any prior interactions with the family, though no previous reports of abuse or neglect have been publicly disclosed. Kristin Bass continues to be held without release as of February 2026, awaiting further proceedings in the 14th Judicial District Court, where the district attorney has vowed a thorough prosecution, emphasizing the need for justice in cases involving defenseless children. Updates from court dockets indicate discovery exchanges between prosecution and defense, with potential plea negotiations not ruled out, though the first-degree murder charge carries a mandatory life sentence or death upon conviction absent reductions. The Sulphur Police Department incident reports detailing the 8 o'clock response and Moss's statements, the Calcasieu Parish Coroner's preliminary autopsy findings, the January 5, 2026 bond hearing minutes, and contemporaneous coverage from KPLC-TV, WWL-TV, and People magazine, quoting family and officials, form the complete documented basis for this account as the matter progresses through the judicial system. And that's the end of our journey through these haunting Louisiana cases on Echo Case File. Thanks for joining. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more, and share to spread the word. Stay curious, stay safe.